My name is Carlos Del Rio, and I will be speaking to you today about hylomorphic attitudinal spirituality, the Spiritual Typology Inventory, and human spirituality in general. This is the focus of my research, and one of the most awesome things about technology is that it allows us to cut through thousands of pages of written text, and in this instance I will be able to synthesize for you in just a few minutes what human spirituality is according to my findings of over several years of work. I hope you find this presentation interesting. As usual, to begin a presentation, and we inherited this since classical Greece, is to have specific definitions of what we mean by the terms we discuss. So the first question that comes to mind is, what is spirituality? Particularly as it is related to mental health and the different disciplines that are engaged in the process of meeting people's spirituality in the therapeutic encounter. One of the contributions that we have from the literature is that spirituality could be seen as a psychological event. Some of the cutting edge research over the last 5 years or so have introduced a new way of viewing spirituality as a personality factor. Um, it, there is empirical evidence to suggest that spirituality is indeed one of the major factors of human personality that has not been documented up to this point. Others, particularly from a theological venue, have considered spirituality as a transforming experience. Different traditions speak of enlightenment and of ecstasy and of encounters with the divine that transform a person and a person's way of life. Obviously, we have different traditions that are religious in nature and define spirituality precisely as a religious experience, one in which people participate in communities of faith that are defined within social milieus. At this time, I'd like to ask you to write down what your definition is of spirituality. It is important that we have our own perceptions as we engage in discussions. So take a moment to write down what spirituality means to you. I'd ask you to keep your notes so that we compare at the end, or that you may compare at the end, what your views of spirituality are versus what you will hear here today, and see whether it has some diverging points or converging points, or whether it is developed further just by participating in this presentation. There are reasons to study spirituality, particularly as it relates to mental health disciplines. One of the reasons that compels us to study this aspect of our humanity is that it is self evident to our fellow human beings. Uh, Persons in different polls that have been taken report on average from an 80 to 90% of agreement that they are spiritual but not religious in their experiences of life. Accreditation standards for academic programs also pertaining to mental health disciplines require the inclusion of spirituality in academic curricula. Professional competence and mental health disciplines also requires the study of spirituality for professional practices. It is also an issue of ethics to be able to provide and to embrace spirituality in the therapeutic encounter. So we have very good, compelling reasons to study spirituality as we participate in the mental health paradigm. Despite these reasons to study spirituality, which are very strong in nature, we also have hesitancies to study spirituality. The source, I believe, through my research, is that there is a conflation between spirituality and religiosity. It generates a sort of religious spirituality, and this creates a sort of aversion to things that are spiritual in nature, because one of the things we think of when we hear the word spirituality is precisely religion or religiosity, and people tend to consider that topic they don't want to engage in. Educators, faculty members particularly, report negative attitudes towards spirituality in the public scene, in public higher education, which is a sad state of affairs given the fact that spirituality is indeed an aspect of our humanities, as we will see later on. Practitioners, however, who remain in touch with people's experiences of life, continue to have more open and more positive attitudes toward embracing spirituality in their practices. The trouble with these divergent viewpoints is that clients remain confused as to what spirituality is, and whether to bring it up in counseling or therapy or not. The result, of course, is an exclusion of religious spirituality again from public higher education, particularly. That is not so in liberal arts and private universities, colleges, and that is a good thing in our society. Interests to study spirituality truly have come to American academia more recently, since the last decade of the 20th century. Um, but yet, these interests also originate from that conflation that exists of spirituality with religiosity, unfortunately. That is the foundation of the inclusion of spirituality and the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that is put out by APA. This inclusion happened in 1994 when spirituality and religiosity were compounded into a V code of diagnosis um, as a relational problem, one that was not considered to be pathological in nature, but yet it became a part of the medical model of diagnosis for treatment purposes and for recognition in the therapeutic encounter. As a result, many areas of mental health or related to mental health, many disciplines began studying what spirituality may mean, but yet the foundational conception was that compounded notion of religious spirituality. It was not spirituality per se, separate from things religious. As a consequence, that conception of religious spirituality, already conflated, was twice conflated by relating it to health based definitions of spirituality, in which people began to report their experiences of spirituality as if they were indeed related to their health. As a consequence, as research on outcomes um, began to take more shape since the 1990s, of course, there was a huge association between spirituality and health. Um, there was no causation that was explained. The casuistry of the value of spirituality onto health was not pinpointed in an empirical sense, but the association was clear because the definitions were equivocal. As a consequence, there is a new position in the literature that considers the definitions that are existing to be useless because of that further compounded sense of spirituality and health. I have come upon growing perception that there needs to be a separation between spirituality and religiosity. religiosity, so that we may at some point be able to truly understand what we mean by either of these terms. I, as well as others in the profession, have suggested that spirituality is not religiosity. And again, there's empirical evidence to suggest that the two terms cannot be collapsed into one. Um, as well as the prior report I mentioned, that spirituality could be seen as a separate factor of human personality. Um, all things being equal, most scholars would agree with the fact that religiosity leads one to discover spirituality and not the other way around. Spirituality I have defined as the nature of the human soul, and this is following the discourse that began 2,400 years ago in Greece with the work of Aristotle, and it was further developed in the 1200s through the work of Thomas Aquinas. As being the nature of the human soul, spirituality is truly a proclivity that propels us toward unity with what is good and what is truthful. Um, that is what is considered to be the essence of the divine. I and many others believe that only insofar as we can separate spirituality from religiosity, we will be able then to include them and to include either one of the two constructs in academic curricula. Again, particularly in public higher education. Spirituality, as I mentioned, is the nature of the human soul, and because everyone who is alive has a soul, the soul has been the life force that enlivens, has been identified as the life source or a life force that enlivens the human organism. The human person, as such, is complete insofar as there is a soul inhabiting a particular body. And by that, I don't mean to separate substances, a soul and a body, but I mean the unity, the substantial unity that ensues from this interaction of soul and body in an organic sense. That's the ontology of the human person. Everyone then, because everyone has a soul and everyone who is alive has a soul, everyone therefore has spirituality, and it is therefore intrinsic to human nature. This allows us to see spirituality as the source of our humanity, as the source of our essence and our nature, and as that distinctive quality of our species on this planet. Something that we are not able to conclude in relation to any other animal species on planet Earth up to this point. So this brings us to a more open way of realizing that there is a distinction between spirituality and religiosity. And as I said, spirituality belongs to human beings ontologically. That is, from the area of speculative philosophy that entertains the study of the things that are real, that exists, we're able to say that spirituality is part of the human individual, first and foremost. And because it is part of that individual, as individuals come together to form communities and societies, then they can express their religiosity in terms of faith in that social sense, but only then, not the other way around. Individuals, a way of looking at that from a more biological point of view is that individuals are really born spiritual, but not religious. They become religious as a result of the fact that they have a spiritual potential in themselves. The teleology, the purpose, the proper end of religiosity is truly spirituality, not the other way around. This has led me to the construction of the Spiritual Typology Inventory. This is an assessment tool that looks at spirituality again as not a psychological process, not as a personological process, not as a scientifically reduced process, not as a biochemical process, not as a neurological process, but as an essential process of the human being, and therefore available to all human beings, cross-socially and transgenerationally. I have been able to define that we have a fundamental spiritual profile that is available to all, and it varies along 8 spiritual types. This inventory I first constructed um, through extensive literature reviews that focused on the works of Anthony de Mello and Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese monk that lives in France. And I was able to develop an item pool that I was later able to see had some sort of face validity regarding my fundamental profile and my spiritual types. It underwent several pilot studies to be able to establish its validity. I used doctoral students, panels of experts, both religious and unreligious in nature, and also a group analysis phase that led us to conclude the fundamental profile and the spiritual types were valid. Then I spent a good amount of time looking at the psychometric properties of that inventory, and again, the 2 conceptual scales, the profile and the spiritual types, underwent alpha coefficients reviews, and also retest reliability with high indexes reported, as we will see shortly. And I also did exploratory factor analyses to corroborate the internal factorial structure of the inventory. The result of this work led me to report the psychometric properties of the Spiritual Typology Inventory in terms of temporal stability, or retest reliability indexes. They were two-tailed for the total inventory, the fundamental spiritual profile, and the spiritual types. And they're pretty high. For the total inventory, we have a 0.75 or 8, so a 0.76 retest coefficient. The internal consistency, or the alpha coefficients that we looked at for in terms of item homogeneity for again the total inventory, the profile, and the spiritual types were pretty high, and these are higher than some of the ones that are reported for other taxonomies of personological utility, such as the Myers-Briggs type indicator, for instance. The factor structure we used to establish the construct validity. All the 8 spiritual types reached eigenvalues higher than 1.0. We also had scree plots that observed higher values than required. Some of the aspects of utility for this typology include the fact that we recognize that spirituality is diverse. We are not measuring spirituality on a linear continuum where we will determine that people either have or not have spirituality, or that rather spirituality could be complementary because it is diverse, and that applies particularly to systemic clients. It is a very good aspect of our relationship to find out that folks are complementary to one another. We have been able to conclude that spirituality is not a relational loss of faith, because it is not a dogmatic issue that rests on religious beliefs. Spirituality is also intrinsic to human beings, as I said. It crosses through time and through cultures and geographical locations. Spirituality leads us also to some sort of epistemic satisfaction, because we're able to understand that the greatest good of the human person is truly the unity that we seek to achieve with that which is transcendent, or with the God of creation, as Spirituality is one's attitude toward life, and that is the definition I like the best because it's simple to convey, because it allows us to put to work what is manifestly empirical and theoretically sound up to this point, and it allows us to discuss it in many areas, whether they are religious or not. Another aspect that I found that emerges from this notion of spirituality is that counseling is healing, is also could be used as a virtue ethics approach to defining what living a good life is. Therapeia, which is our Greek ancient word for therapy, truly means healing of its own kind, and as a consequence renders all psychotherapists or counselors as wounded healers in themselves. It gives us a sense of humility as we share our discoveries with other people. It allows us to use integrationalism instead of eclecticism, and the difference between the two here is the fact that we're not only using techniques without rationale, but we're certainly going through and utilizing a more person-centered, constructivist approach to solving our problems, finding our differences, resolving our wounds, and accepting our brokenness as we work in therapy with other people. The teleological nature of the human organism, that is dedicated to seeking unity with what is transcendent. Again, the notion of hylomorphism, which is the matter and form unity in the human substance. It is informed from philosophical and theological investigations, and this is opposed to the dualism that leads us to suggest that human beings are nothing but a collection of genetic makeup or biochemical processes of the human body. And obviously, there is a radical acceptance that comes from the fact that we're able to understand things and to know things within our own limits. I have put together a few aspects of reflection to this presentation, and so it'd be nice to hear what your thoughts are. I provided my email at the beginning of this presentation. I'd like to hear from each of you as to what your thoughts are and how to improve this farther, both in terms of its presentation and in terms of its content. Was your view of spirituality changed or improved as a result of this time together? And what information would you take away as you depart today? Some terms we used: and our source that ends the presentation. One paper that I published in this research, and of course, this adds to my repertoire of investigations that I wish to continue working on in the years to come. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found this time nourishing and uplifting. Thanks again. Bye.